Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing today? I hope everyone is having a fantastic day. Um, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Um, there's two parts to this video today. The first part is for the 6th and 7th graders. We'll be going over, or I will be discussing each of the articles that I had you read this week, discussing why they're important and what impact they had on the modern world, and so on and so forth. The second half of this video will be then here for my 8th graders that show up. We will be discussing the study.com assignments that I have been assigning them for the last several weeks and discussing the exam that they will have. So, let us get started. There were a bunch of articles that you could have chosen from this week. The first was an article on Vatican II. The next was on the Berlin Wall. The third was on the Cuban Missile Crisis. The fourth was the March on Washington. The fifth was the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The sixth was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The seventh was the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, Bobby Kennedy's death, the moon landing, and the invention of ARPANET. For 8th grade, again, if you missed my YouTube video with Miss Saavedra and Miss Reyes on Wednesday, yes, I discussed it there. It is an open book, but please wait till the end for 8th grade questions. So, the first thing that we're going to talk about is Vatican II. Vatican II was very important, especially to people that follow the Catholic faith, or even the Christian faith in general. It had an impact on, 20% of the world's population, maybe up to a third of the world's population at the time. It was a gathering of basically all the different Catholic Church leaders, all into Rome, in order to discuss various different church principles and doctrines. And it basically fundamentally shaped the Catholic Church that you all see to this very day. The fact that the Mass is in English or Spanish or Polish comes from Vatican II. The close cooperation with with other Christian churches and non-Christian faiths. That also comes from Vatican II, because before that, the Catholic Church had a very oppositional approach to churches of other religions. It basically shows the Catholic Church's willingness to work in the modern day, especially with modern issues. And it is a period of history in the Catholic Church that not many people fundamentally understand anymore. But the Catholic Church fundamentally changed, for better or worse. That is your own decisions to be made. The Catholic Church as you knew it. The Catholic Church that my grandparents grew up with is different than the one that my parents and I grew up with. It basically canceled the excommunication between the Catholic and Orthodox churches that had happened 9 centuries before. This was all about reconciliation and growing and cooperation and understanding. And without Vatican II, the Catholic Church would have remained the same. So while it may not have had a major impact on the entirety of the world, it definitely fundamentally changed large aspects of peoples religious practices, especially in the Western world, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, the United States, Central and South America, so on and so forth. Then we move on to the Berlin Wall being built. This is one of the defining moments of the Cold War. This period of increased tension between the United States and Russia. This is one of the most important moments. And it's a wall being put up, sealing off West Berlin from East Germany. The Berlin Wall became a symbol of the struggle between East and West. You know, I actually have a small piece of the wall that I bought when I visited Germany during my vacation after I graduated high school. Was it high school or college? It was, I don't know, it was a long time ago. But the reason I bring that up is that the Berlin Wall divides. It was a dividing moment. It divided families. It divided a city that had existed for centuries. People that were trapped in West Berlin, that lived in East Germany, on the day the wall was put up, weren't allowed to return home. Thousands died trying to cross the wall to go from east to west during the time it existed. Its eventual destruction in the 1989 symbolized the end of the Cold War. Just as its construction and rise signaled the escalation of the Cold War, its eventual destruction symbolizes its end. And just know that this Berlin Wall was a dividing factor. It tore families apart. And you might say, well, it only impacted a small area in Germany. No, this symbol, this wall that was put up, became a point of contention for the entire world to rally behind in tearing it down, or maintaining its construction and its use as a way to divide and imprison a people. Because that's what it was supposed to do. It wasn't supposed to imprison West Germans in Berlin. It was supposed to imprison East Germans so they could not escape. With the Berlin Wall going up, that leads to very increased tensions, what actually leads to this next event. The Cuban Missile Crisis was probably the closest humanity has ever gotten to World War III. This is without a doubt the closest humanity has ever gotten to World War III. This 13-day period in October of 1962. I mean, if we had been in school, I would have probably shown this to each of my classes at some point. But I know I've shown it to at least my 8th graders already. And I might have shown it to my 7th graders. I don't remember. It's hard to describe the terror that people lived with during this 13-day period. It's one of the defining moments in history because the world went very close to the abyss, stared at it, and was about 3 hours away from jumping in. The world looked at nuclear war and was prepared to jump into it. You know, let's see. My father was alive during the Cuban Missile Crisis began, and he just remembers the amount of terror that existed uh, during this time period. Uh, how people, were scared that this was it. They were spending time with family. They were driving off into the countryside to be safe. And the Cuban Missile Crisis highlights the danger of nuclear weapons. Because the reason it starts is because both sides thought they could get an advantage over the other. And they wanted to get advantage over the other. It became an ego game. If we place nuclear weapons here, then you'll put them here, and we'll put yours here, and then you'll put yours here, and eventually, nuclear weapons were put in places that just made people uncomfortable, and almost started wars because of it. It's just not a very good time period. Um, so, and what ends up happening after the Cuban Missile Crisis? Actually, the Cuban Missile Crisis will end. With both sides basically agreeing, you know what? Nuclear war is stupid. We're not going to do this. We are not going to die just so that our country's egos can be boosted. We're not going to kill off the world for this. It's not going to happen. That's basically how this all ends. That just both sides just agreeing, you know what? War is stupid. We eventually will move on to the March on Washington. The March on Washington may not have had a major impact on the United States. I'm sorry, on the world, but it did have a huge impact on the United States. It fundamentally brought attention to, well, civil rights. And it brought attention to the civil rights movement to the center stage, which will eventually lead to, a year later, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ends, well, it basically ends discrimination in the United States on basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It's these two events that combined that are a defining moment. Without the March on Washington, the Civil Rights Act cannot pass. However, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 doesn't pass without pressure from the March on Washington. And it's where we also get the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr., who became a very prominent civil rights activist even before this. But this brought him to the center stage as well, even more so. We will then move on to the Gulf of Tonkin incident. This is the Vietnam War. This is America's longest war that will last for 10 years until, the War on Terror. The Gulf of Tonkin incident starts Vietnam. And the Vietnam War was devastating conflict in Southeast Asia. Without the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Vietnam doesn't happen. The Vietnam War doesn't happen. And in fact, without the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the War Powers Act doesn't happen, which basically gives the president to declare, limited wars for a certain amount of time. That law is still used to this very day. Without the Gulf of Tonkin incident, that law is not passed, meaning that the United States is not able to do, its series of short wars that it's fought in over the last 20 years of our lives. My life, and the last, 15 to 10 years of yours. The Gulf of Tonkin incident gives immense power to the President of the United States to use the military however they see fit. And it starts the Vietnam War. A devastating conflict. Lasted for 10 years. Devastated a region of the world. We've come now to the assassinations of JFK, MLK, and Robert Kennedy. These 3 deaths all happen within the span of 5 years. In 1963 for John F. Kennedy, and in 1968 for Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy. One president, one civil rights leader, one potential president. These 3 deaths combined, they scare America. That's what happens. They scare America. The death of John F. Kennedy was the first time since Lincoln, no, not since Lincoln, since McKinley, nearly 60 years earlier, that a president had been assassinated while in office. It scared Americans. He was a very popular president. However, without his death, the Civil Rights Act does not pass. It's his death that gives the final push for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Well, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and the assassination of Bobby Kennedy in 1968 was just a tumultuous period in American history. It was a time of great unrest, the anti-war movement thanks to Vietnam, the race riots after the assassination of Kennedy, and then finally the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, sparking more riots. This is just the age of chaos in the United States. I want you to imagine this for a minute that you're in your shoe. This happens in your time. You have a president that gets assassinated. A very prominent civil rights leader gets assassinated. A senator gets murdered. There's a war. There's protests on the street. There's a nuclear crisis earlier. The church is changing. A wall has been built up. This is a period of great social change. A time of great chaos. At the start of the 60s, there was a threat of World War III. By the end of it, America is literally tearing itself apart as its leaders are assassinated in the streets, in hotels. And that all accumulates in 2 final events. The 1969 moon landing and the invention of ARPANET. We'll start with ARPANET, even though it comes last. ARPANET is the modern internet. Well, the ancient internet. Without ARPANET, there would be no internet today. I would not be doing this live stream to you from the comfort of my own basement. It would be impossible. You would not be able to go onto YouTube and watch whatever you'd like, whenever you'd like. Stream Netflix, or watch Disney Plus, or play video games with your friends online, because it wouldn't have existed without it. And this allows computers to connect and transfer information in a way that just does not happen before, and has only been improved on ever since. I hope you can understand why ARPANET's important, because without it, the internet cannot exist. There's no purpose for ARPANET without the internet. And finally, we come to the 1969 moon landings. It is the first time humanity has ever stepped on another planet, or another celestial body besides our own planet, our own home. We have left the confines of our earthly sphere and traveled beyond it to another celestial body. And that's basically it for it. It has inspired future generations of astronauts to return to the moon and to go to Mars and to explore the very edges of our solar system and our galaxy in order to improve it. These are the defining moments of this decade, and a lot of it is chaos. Vast church upheaval from Vatican II, international strife by the construction of the Berlin Wall and the division and imprisonment of a city, World War III with the Cuban Missile Crisis, civil rights unrest in the United States with the March on Washington, the assassination of Kennedy, and eventual passage of the Civil Rights Act, the assassination of MLK, further fueling the civil unrest in the United States along with Bobby Kennedy's death, the Gulf of Tonkin incident starting the Vietnam War, which would lead to the anti-war protests of the late 60s and early 70s, before finally ending on a more scientific and peaceful note with the landing on the moon, with the moon landing in 1969, and the invention of ARPANET, the ancient predecessor to the modern internet. A hope of looking forward to the 70s and to next week. So for my 6th and 7th graders, that is it. For any 8th graders that are here, as you can see, I assigned a few more articles for you already. They are due by 5:20. As you see, there will be a Chapter 1 exam that will be assigned on 5/21 and will be due on 5/21. It is an open book study.com test, meaning you'll be able to use your study.com articles, your textbook if you have it, which you all should have it, to answer these questions. On early next week, I will be doing a review game for the exam, going over some of the questions that will be on it. It is a multiple choice exam. There are no tricks, no hidden whistles here. Not trying to trick you. And it is only on the Civil War. So, does anyone have any questions for me today? If there are no questions, please know that you can contact me for my 6th and 7th graders about the articles at any time. I may not respond to them if it's outside of 9 to 1 immediately, but I will respond as soon as I see them. For my 8th graders for your exam, feel free to contact me at any time before it. If there are no questions, I hope you all stay safe and have a good weekend. Goodbye, everyone.